What are the level 1, 2, and 3?
So you mentioned forgiveness. Level 1 might be blame, let's say. You don't want to blame people. That's not healthy. Let's suppose. Maybe level 2 is better. Forgiveness. Is beatific. She wrote a sermon about this, actually, or she gave a talk to a church. This is where she came up with this idea. Forgiveness is better than blame, but there is a better than better. Understanding is even better than forgiveness. So if someone, let's say, and this is true about human beings, so she thinks her main insight, the strongest insight that she has, I think she has like 20,000 different amazing, but she thinks the strongest is that when people do something, they must have had a reason, or else they wouldn't have done it. So the way we label and think about people, suppose you know somebody who is always late. You invite them to a dinner party and they're always late, right? Every time they're late. You think it's disrespectful, it's rude, they don't value your time, they're self-centered, they're selfish. You can also think about that from their perspective. They're not trying to be self-centered or rude or anything else, right? What is it about them? What's the positively valenced alternative of the exact same activity? They're spontaneous. Things always come up, right? So if you know that they're spontaneous, you know they're probably going to be late, but they'll come with a great story of why they're late, right? Or if someone who is, you think this girl is very rigid in their approach, right? They never change. They don't listen to arguments. They're just rigid, but they're also consistent from their point of view. So, and you can't, someone who's gullible is also trusting. If you try to change the part of a person, which by itself is already a mindless activity, to try to change a part of a person as if a person is a mechanism. People are everything at once. But anyway, if you try to reduce their gullibility, you're also going to reduce their trustingness. And that changes them as a person, right? Maybe they don't want to give up that value of trusting. I think Ellen did this experiment. I think the San Antonio Spurs have a similar thing when they interview people. If you go on an interview and it asks you a bunch of questions, circle which of these negative qualities you don't like in people. Rigid. Right? Late, self-centered, rude, gullible. These are terrible. But they don't circle all of them, just those, whatever they circle. Then you flip it over. Which of these positive attributes do you think are good for people to have? Spontaneous, right? So people match themselves on both. There is a connection between the two. They are the same thing in a sense. They're inextricable. So when you're looking at somebody, you're like, oh my God, that person is so gullible or rigid or whatever. That's a level 1 interpretation of their actions. A level 2 might be to convince them to change their ways, to mend you should be less rigid, you should be more flexible, you should be more forgiving. But a level 3 might say, from their perspective, what they're doing is a noble thing, it's a good thing. And even if you never tell them that that's how you view them now, or that's how you interpreted their actions, you have become more mindful, and in your eyes, they have become more mindful, and through mindful contagion and everything else, if you do that enough times, like people do become, like they appreciate the fact that you appreciate them for being the humans that they are.
Yeah, any strength can be looked at as a weakness, and any weakness can be looked at as a strength, because they're two sides of the same coin.
Very well
so
put.
Largely, your perspective is a reflection of how you want to see that person, right? So if you don't like that person, they're rigid. If you do like that person, they're consistent.
That's exactly right. And that's something Dr. Langer has said, and that stuck with me a lot. The most important thing is if people like you. If people like it, not you, but like in general, if somebody is liked, everything they do is interpreted positively. If you don't like somebody, exactly like you said, you're going to interpret it negatively. The second layer to that is what makes people like you? If you like them.
You think that's the only thing?
I think that's all there is. If you mindfully, genuinely like another human being, like I like you. If we're sitting here right now and I just have lots of good feelings about you.
Well, that's mutual.
Thank you. And it's mindful. Like I notice new things about you. How have you been? It's not like, okay, let's do this, get out of the way. There's a genuine liking. Whatever you do now, let's say you look off to the distance for a second, right? If I didn't like you, I'd think, my God, either I'm being boring if I don't like myself, or you're bored, or something is happening. But if I'm mindful, I know that you're thinking maybe what should be the next question, what's our timing? Like you're thinking about how to make this the best possible interview, right? I'm not reading your thoughts. I just know that because I like you, you're worthy of being liked, you're a wonderful person, you're probably being mindful, and you have great reasons for doing what you're doing.
What are the impacts of this approach on health?
One of her earliest work was called Counterclockwise. She took 70, 80-year-old men, brought them to a week-long retreat, which was retrofitted to appear to be 20 years earlier. And they were all instructed to live in a world as if they were 20 years younger. The news was from 20 years ago, the music was from 20 years ago, the food, the environment, everything. It's as if they were on a time machine. So that sounds like a fun activity. But then at the end of it, you measure them. These are old men, right? 80, maybe even 90, I don't remember. But if you measure them on their gait, their vision, their hearing, their strength, and objectively people viewing them in terms of evaluating their age, everything improved. Now, when have you ever heard of research improving elderly men that much, or at all even? Like vision improving? Impossible. And yet, that's her kind of amazing approach to life, is you can think of things, if you think of things being mindful, there's literally nothing that's impossible.
So this is the power of thought, the power of choosing your perspective and interpretation of the world, yes?
Yes.
Do you think this explains the placebo effect?
She has a really interesting take on the placebo effect. Placebos work. That's known. Everyone knows that it's really hard. This is your field, right? If you put people in two conditions and one of them is a no treatment group, great, you're going to crush it. But if one of them is a placebo, it's really hard. Placebos work. But she asks this question: why do we stop? So we do an experiment. The placebo worked. It helped some people. And we tell them, hey, surprise, you got the placebo. See you later. Thanks for coming. Here's your $5. But the next step is to tell them, look, you didn't have any medicine, and yet you improved. What caused that improvement?
Their belief in the efficacy of the treatment.
Right. Which comes from where? What body part?
I mean, that's your mind.
Your mind. So do you still have it with you as you leave the experiment? You can continue this improvement forever. You don't need a sugar pill. You don't need anything else.
But you can't, though, because you don't really believe it. Because once the illusion is lifted, you can't will yourself to believe something that you believe is false.
Let's dig into that. It depends how you frame it. So if you frame it that way, and you say, aha, the only reason this worked is because I, the brilliant laboratory technician, deceived you. All hail me. Then you have the power. I did nothing. I'm just a mindless recipient of your benevolence. But that's not really what happened. The power always was in your brain, in your mind. And if you know that you were able to do it through deceit, someone else telling you to believe something or to expect something to happen, right? And actually, the placebos, correct me if I'm wrong, continue to work even if you don't know if you're in even if you don't know if you're being given medicine that might be in which group, right? Like it's not purely deceptive. You have no idea that the other medicine might work. You don't even know what's in it. You're not part of the patent. You didn't do any exploration. You're just told you're given a pill that we're testing to see if it improves things. That's it. You can do that to yourself without any deception, right? You know that you have done it. You created the improvement. There might be other paths to the same improvement that don't require deception.
They all require faith. So when you're going into that clinical trial and you're getting that pill and you're feeling better, you believe that that's the effect of that pill. As soon as you stop getting that pill, or as soon as you're told that that's a placebo, you no longer can force yourself to believe in that. Like you have to try to generate faith.
Let's not use the word faith yet, but that key point right there is what happens when you are told. And that's her insight, is right now we're told it only worked because you believed, because I told you, because I lied to you. So as you walk out the door, it's going to stop working.
Mm-hmm.
Another way of framing it is, look, we didn't expect this to work at all. We gave you nothing. How did you do this?
Mm-hmm.
What thinking did you go through? Well, I thought it might help me. And what next did you think about that? Well, I thought to start noticing new things that I'm doing, right? This is her approach called attention to variability. When does it hurt more or less? Maybe I'll do more of those things, right? It's all caused by the person. And if you allow them to maintain that agency rather than stripping them of it as they walk out the door, maybe the effects could be more lasting.
So perhaps, if I'm reading into this right, that placebo works by sparking mindfulness.
Oh, that's an interesting hypothesis. I don't know.
Well, maybe you just said maybe it works because they're noticing things, and because they're in the process of actively noticing things,
that could be a mechanism for why it works. That's really interesting. I was suggesting more of eliciting mindfulness from them at the time of release by, instead of saying, okay, you were deceived, ha, 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 get out, to say, why do you think it worked? So that let them start generating hypotheses in their mind. Oh, well, I noticed now that I think about it, I noticed that I started doing a few things differently, or I expected it to work, or I drank more, I ate more, whatever it is. They start retroactively understanding what their activities were and therefore becoming mindful about it going forward. But maybe you're right. Maybe just giving a placebo induces a form of attention to variability. I don't know.
Well, wouldn't it? Because anything that you're doing new that you don't know if it's going to work or not, you start paying attention to try to test, well, is this working?
You may be right. How does that explain the double placebo, double effect, though?
Explain
Like if you
it.
give people double doses of placebo, they do twice as well, right?
So explain that again.
My understanding from placebos is you give people a placebo, 1 sugar pill a day, they gain some improvement on average. But if you have a second group where you give them 2 sugar pills a day, they have an even bigger improvement.
I didn't know about that.
Maybe that, I could be wrong, I read it somewhere, but maybe that does go to your point though, because 2 is even more different than 1, right? So even more you're attentive to variability.
Or your expectation is higher, and the level of your expectation tracks to the level of a placebo effect.
Right. But again, the expectation, it's not to be dismissed. The fact that your expectations are higher, your expectations are under whose control? You can expect whatever you want, right?
I'm not sure that's so simple, because your expectations are reasonable. I can expect that tomorrow a Ferrari with $1 billion is going to drive up to my house and be gifted to me tax-free. I don't really expect that. And even though I'd really want to expect that, because it might make me happier for the next 24 hours until it fails to materialize, I can't generate that internally because I don't believe it.
Right. I'm sorry, you're going to get the car, but you're going to have to pay taxes. That's the downside. Right? So even moderate improvement could be good. So the fact that expectations work can either be attributed to an external source manipulating you or to an internal ability to change your body through your mind, right? Both are true. If you're able to control it, there might be other paths to control it. So let's ask you, we didn't do it, right? Maybe we set up expectations, but you did everything else. What was it that you did?
So you think that there's a way to operationalize or make functional manipulating your own expectations?
I don't like that framing of it, but it's more about appreciating the novelty, looking for when things are better or worse. What do they correlate with? Is it time of day? Is it who you're with? Is it what you eat? Is it weather? Is it something on the news, right? And if you start to ask those questions, basically being more scientific, generating new explanations, generating new knowledge after being mindful about it, that's the way we cure all problems on Earth, right? Is we come up with new explanations and we test them. That's ultimately what attention to variability is.
So how do you think this applies to law, for example?
It would be interesting to imagine having a mindful jury versus a mindless jury. Have you served in a jury?
No.
You got out, or you just?
I tore a hamstring and I couldn't go.
I've not been on a jury either. I've been like in the room where they were deciding and I didn't get picked. I would imagine that it's a pretty mindful activity, but it can also be a drudgery. So if you generate mindfulness in a jury, I wonder if that makes different outcomes. Judges, if they could be induced to be mindless or mindful, or mediators. If you're a mediator, an arbitrator, if you're more mindful, maybe you come to a better resolution. So one of the things you tend to think about compromises, right? Everyone teaches you compromises are win-win. It's not, it's lose-lose. Everybody is missing out on what they wanted, right? So a compromise is essentially a very mindless solution or proposed solution. A mindful approach would give everybody more than what they wanted. There must be, you can't reduce it to an algorithm by definition because it's mindful, right? You have to come up with some additional way of increasing the pie that makes everybody better off. But there are ways. So we've started running some brief surveys into this kind of conflict resolution where you ask people, here's a conflict. Let's say it's a divorced mother and father and they're doing some custody, or it's the Middle East, right? And you're on one side or the other side of, here's the two parties involved. In one condition, we ask them, how would you resolve it? And they typically say some sort of compromise, split the weekends or give up some land or do whatever. But if you put them in a mindful state and you explicitly say, so back to your earlier question, how do you make them mindful? You do a little bit of things, but then in the instructions you say, you're not allowed to compromise. they come up with really unique and new ideas. Shared custody or a vacation or some. There's always something new and outside of the box that we're in to come up with. So I think the law could benefit from that sort of mindfulness. Of course, lawyers themselves. We've had some discussions with law firms. Mental health and well-being is a huge aspect now for lawyers. They get stressed out. They get burnt out. What is burnout? Where does burnout come from? You don't get burnt out if you're mindful. Mindlessness is energy draining. Mindfulness is energy begetting. Like you become more energetic. You leave the end of the day feeling great, right? If you're able to do things mindfully. So if you can find things, as Ellen would put it, that you're attentive to the variability within the context, you're looking for ways to be mindful with your clients, with your peers, with your partners, with your colleagues, then maybe you can start generating even better legal advice for your clients.
You have a fair bit of experience in the sports industry. How does mindfulness play an impact or could play an impact when it comes to athletics?
I'd love to do more research on this. Dr. Langer's had a couple of ideas. One I really like, and I think it would be a very simple experiment to run. We're going to try to do it. If you're practicing hitting, like baseball, there is some variability in how they throw the ball, right? But what if the ball they threw also had some sort of crazy weight in it, something you would never see in a real game, but that it bounces completely crazily, right? If you train on that a few times, you must become more mindful because things are crazy. Now you have to watch each ball to see, is this one of those crazy balls or is this a regular ball that I can hit? I wonder how many times you need to practice with those crazy ones versus, let's say you do 10, one condition does 10 crazy, the other, or random crazy, random not, the other does 10 regular pitches, and then you see how they do in the next 10. Right? How much harder they hit, how much faster, how much longer. I think that would be a great experiment. Another one that I've done personally on myself, this is one of the first things I started doing when I learned about mindfulness is when I'm shooting free throws. When is mindlessness supposedly, even theoretically, when is it the best thing to do? It's when you've come up with a solution to a problem, the solution is fixed, the problem is fixed, the context is fixed, everything is exactly the same as it always will be, then whatever solution you've come up with, that's what you should do, right? Of course, none of those assumptions are ever true, but the best example I can think of where it must be as close as possible to true and where the general standard advice is to do everything the exact goddamn same way that you've ever done is free throws. You're standing there, it's always 15 feet, it's always 10 feet high, right? It's the same ball. You should be able to do the exact same thing. So it's a bit of a mystery why in the NBA, professional basketball players, they're not all like 95% free throw shooters. Fine, maybe not 100, but 90, 95. The average is like 70, 75. And it's been that way for decades. Now, there are people like Guinness World Record holders who can shoot 5,000 in a row, swishes, right? So it's humanly possible. And sometimes they shoot underhand or they do other things, but whatever it is, there is a solution that you can get to 100%. Presumably, professional athletes should be able to do it. There's something there. Obviously, restrictions on how much time they can spend on it, right? They have to focus on other things as well. Nevertheless, what I've been trying to do is sometimes I would take a shot and I would induce myself to be mindless, right? Same as a salesman. Try to remember the best shot I ever took, try to take it the exact same way. Or try to change my shot in a way that I don't think anybody else would notice, right? And it's anecdotal and who knows what I remember and I forget, but in the second condition, I feel like I do better. And it certainly trains me, and it's certainly more fun, but it trains me better for a game because in a game situation, someone's going to move a little bit. Maybe I'm not exactly on the line. Who cares? It's novelty. I'm noticing new things anyway. So I think there's a huge upside for mindfulness in sports.
So in your personal experience, how big of that effect is it? Like, so out of 10 free throws, when you're mindless, how many do you get in?
Maybe two, maybe one or two more.
One or two more?
Yeah.
So that's a significant increase.
I guess. On the one hand, I agree with you. It's statistically significant, but on the other hand, so I made 6 out of 10 versus 7 or 8 out of 10. Like, it's not. Who cares? The world's not going to change because of that, right? But it matters to me. I enjoy it.
Has it changed the way you approach research?
Yeah, we did this experiment with archive.org. They have a list of all the abstracts for all the published articles across different fields. For my own research, I've noticed that I'm trying to become more conditional. So one of the experiments that we do is for middle schoolers is take absolute textbooks like the Civil War happened because of this, 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 and this, change it to conditionalized. The Civil War may have happened because of this or whatever, and then test people on their knowledge. She's run these experiments before, and the knowledge, what tends to happen is the knowledge is the same, but then the ability to apply that knowledge in novel contexts is only in the second condition. So if you're absolutist, you're just regurgitating. If you're conditional, you understand it and you can apply it in novel situations. So I've tried to make my own language more conditionalized rather than absolute. And we, as a curiosity, we ran it on these archives, and we counted in each abstract, very simple, just how many occurrences of may, perhaps, could, to see what percentage of the abstracts used conditionalized language versus those that didn't. And what's nice about archive.org is they have all sorts of fields. They have from math and condensed matter physics and economics. They have all sorts of things. So we ranked by field what percentage of their published articles had used conditionalized language. You won't be surprised. At the bottom, the third to last or second to last was math. Math is very absolute, right? But the worst one, the one that's most absolute, is a field I'm not familiar with, but it's called like exact solutions or something like that, a portion of math. So no surprise, that's very absolutist. At the top was a surprising field, and the field that I was most interested in looking at was economics. Where do you think they ended up? Where would you guess economics in terms of ranking from? Very absolutist to very conditional.
It would probably be closer to the conditional.
Closer up here, right? Yeah, that's what I thought too. Because it's economics, it's about people. Who the heck? How are we making absolute statements about what human beings are going to do? Right? It's absurd. So I'll tell you, the number one most conditional field. You'll never guess this. I wouldn't have guessed it. Do you want to guess it?
The most conditional?
The most conditional. It's not economics.
Sociology.
I don't think they actually have sociology. Astrophysics. And then number 2 or 3 are things like general relativity. Very advanced esoteric physics is the most conditional. You would think that's the one that's talking about reality the most, right? This is the world. So in physics, when you have a theory, it's not a best guess. It's literally our best possible explanation of literally reality. This is what is happening, right? The quantum mechanics is this, relativity is that. But no, in those fields, they're the most mindful by this measure. They appreciate that there could be a may, perhaps, or could. Economics is right about halfway. I don't know what to make of that. I would have expected it to be much more conditional, right? I can understand why much of economics is very absolutist. It's just very quantitative. This is the model, and this is what people do. And
the model or empirical economics,
But with empirical, there's a mindless tendency to ignore everything but the average. But what's more interesting is the variability.
Well, no, the standard deviation. I mean,
but that's just the standard. Yes, that's just to measure the statistical significance to bulwark the mean, right? Mm-hmm. And then you report the mean. People in this condition do better, and that's all you remember. But the difference might be microscopic or economically insignificant, but statistically significant, right? Even if it's insubstantial. The fact that there's so much differences between people, that's the interesting thing. What makes those differences? How can we harness them or understand them or appreciate them in a better way? Those are the interesting questions to me. But so that I think that's what's pushing economics down closer to math, even though it's what it's doing. In other words, it's a false confidence in the results, I believe. That's my understanding. I haven't reviewed, obviously, every document there, but that's the explanation I'm leaning towards for why economics is not as conditional, or sociology, like where we would have expected it to be.
Do you think this disparity in the fields has ramifications in the real world? For example, in business or engineering?
Interesting. I'd have to think about that. What do you think?
I think it should. Because the more rigid your belief system is, the less able you are to take in new information or modify based on changing circumstances.
The ability to look for differences and come to appreciate that errors can happen and we can try to reduce them rather than this is the way it's always been done, this is the way we're going to do it, right? That's an enforced institutional mindlessness.
Well, the institutional mindlessness can lead to authoritarian dogmatic thinking. And that's what I think has the most real world application. The rise, paradoxically, like the more established the field, the more dogmatic its adherents can become, while feeling justified and being able to be authoritative by citing more and more research that has more and more citations. So it sort of goes into
It's like
this
a mindless cycle.
mindless, vicious loop of authority.
Agreed. And education is a perfect example of that. So Ellen and I are writing a book exactly about this, about systemic mindlessness, institutional mindlessness. And if you think about education, what are you typically being taught is to memorize and regurgitate and agree and conform. You're not encouraged to come up with unique answers. So if you ask, what's 1 + 1, and some kid says 1, you're going to berate them and chastise them. I'm exaggerating, of course, but you're going to tell them, "Oh, nice try, Johnny, but actually, look, 1 and 1 is 2. And yet this is one of Ellen's favorite examples. 1 and 1 is not always 2, right? 1 wad of chewing gum and 1 wad of chewing gum, boom. What is that? That's 1 wad of chewing gum. 1 cloud plus 1 cloud is 1 cloud. 1 pile of laundry plus 1 pile of laundry is 1 pile. 1 + 1 is 1, right? So a different approach to education might be not to insist on one correct answer, but elicit information from the students, let them grow and generate new knowledge and explanations, and ask them what they're thinking about, right? Find contexts in which their answer is correct. Then we all learn from each other and we can grow exponentially rather than, this bucket where we're just pouring water and seeing how much sticks in each person's cup.
But don't you think that also has the downside of arresting feedback cycles? So when Johnny says 1 + 1 = 1, and instead of saying, no, it's actually 2, and start studying arithmetic and understanding the rules of it and how it works.
Get to it, Johnny.
Get to it. Instead of that, well, maybe you're right. Doesn't that destabilize the educational process?
Maybe that's a good thing, but not, well, maybe you're right, but explain why, Johnny. And he'll say, well, I'm thinking I have a pile of toys here, and I have a pile of toys here. I put them together, I have 1 pile of toys. Oh, interesting insight, Johnny. Does anyone else have a different take? Well, yeah, because I have 2 cubes. 1 and 1 is 2. Oh, another interesting perspective. There's multiple ways of looking at the same thing. People will learn the algorithmic stuff pretty easily if it's important for them to do so. But if you have the multiple perspectives, they both learn twice as much.
Hopefully.
That's one of the experiments we're planning to run.
To make people explain.
Yeah, to do this in an educational setting with middle schoolers.
Can you tell us a little bit about the experimental design that you're thinking?
Yeah, sure. So my daughter Maya co-wrote this book with Alan Langer, and she actually just gave a presentation yesterday to 5th and 6th graders. She's now in 8th grade. She wrote it 2 years ago. She was a 6th grader. Now she's an 8th grader. She's presented it to them. It has absolute versus conditionalized language. What happens if you change that and then measure the mindfulness results and the knowledge abilities? That's one possible experiment. Another possible experiment is you're given a story to read that's either, and Maya wrote these with Ellen, either the story is relatively mindless, where the characters behave almost like NPCs, like you were saying, right? You see this, you see that, but nothing really sinks in, versus they're observing somebody mindfully. And then you give them questions like, you see a man taking money from a cash register, come up with 5 different possible explanations for why that could be. If you're mindful, it's much easier to come up with 5, right? Here's a technique for dealing with worry. You're worried about your exams or whatever you're worried about. I'm worried I might fail the next test. Okay, do these things. First, list 3 reasons why that's not likely to happen. Well, I have been studying. Most grades are typically within 1 or 2 standard deviations of the grade you have so far. I am worried about it, which is probably going to motivate me to study a little bit more. Right? My teacher says I'm doing it. So all these reasons, it's probably going to be fine. And then come up with 3 reasons why even if it does happen, that's still fine. Okay, so if I get a bad grade, I can retake it. I can maybe up my grade later. I'll learn something new. And once you do that, the worry kind of goes away, right? Because you have a certain level of control on it. And the last one, I'm not sure we'll run this quickly because it'll take some technological preparation, is related to the counterclockwise we were talking about with 70, 80, 90-year-old men. What if we do that to 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old boys and girls? Instead of counterclockwise, making them younger, make them older. Put on a filter in the Zoom so that they look older, they have a nice beard or whatever it is. Act like adults, pretend that they're adults. Not pretend, just actually be adults for a while, and then test them and see, are they able to do things that you would be amazed that a 5th, 6th, 7th grader could do, but that would be relatively routine for, let's say, a high school senior or a college freshman. And not things like driving and voting, but like leadership or ability to start and manage a topic, or meet strangers, or write emails, or whatever. Things that, wow, a 7th grader did that? All from just becoming and understanding that you can be your older self.
That's very interesting, and I hope you have continued success with your research in this area. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.